In 1947, as fireworks lit up the night sky of New Delhi, a quiet shockwave rippled far beyond India's borders. Crowds in Accra, Dar es Salaam, and Johannesburg whispered the same thought. If India can break free from one of the world's biggest empires, maybe we can too. What happened in India didn't stay in India. It ignited a fire across the African continent that no colonial power could put out. But how did one country's independence spark a chain reaction thousands of miles away? To answer that, we need to rewind to a time when Gandhi was not yet a global figure, but a young lawyer on the streets of South Africa. Long before India's independence, Mahatma Gandhi was fighting battles in South Africa. He wasn't leading masses yet, he was a struggling lawyer, facing discrimination on trains and in courtrooms. That humiliation turned into innovation. Gandhi began experimenting with a new weapon, satyagraha, or truth force. Instead of responding to violence with violence, Gandhi's campaigns of strikes, boycotts, and peaceful resistance began to shake the foundations of white minority rule. African leaders at the time noticed. They saw an Indian man, outnumbered and outgunned, forcing colonial officials to negotiate. But Gandhi's South African years were only the beginning. What he tested there would later become the blueprint that India used to push out the British Empire, and Africa was watching carefully, waiting for its turn. So when Gandhi returned to India and transformed a local idea into a global revolution, African freedom fighters took notes. But the most explosive moment came in 1947, when the impossible happened. On August 15, 1947, after nearly 200 years of British rule, India became independent. The British flag came down, and a new nation was born. To many in the West, it was the end of an empire. But in Africa, it looked like the beginning of something much bigger. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, and later Nelson Mandela in South Africa, all saw India's independence as proof that colonial power wasn't permanent. If India, with its massive population and deep divisions, could do it through resistance and resilience, then Africa had a roadmap. But independence wasn't just symbolic. India didn't go quiet after 1947. Instead, its leaders actively reached out to Africa, turning freedom into a global movement, and nowhere was that more visible than in Bandung. In 1955, leaders from 29 newly independent Asian and African nations gathered in Bandung, Indonesia. For the first time, voices from the global South sat together without colonial masters in the room. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, stood before African leaders and called for solidarity. "We are of one mind, one heart. Your struggle is our struggle." His words resonated deeply. Delegates from Ghana, Egypt, and Ethiopia listened, inspired by the idea that independence wasn't just about one nation's freedom, but about breaking the chains of an entire continent. At Bandung, India positioned itself as a bridge connecting Asian experience with African aspiration, and that connection would soon show up in the personal lives of Africa's most iconic leaders. Take Kwame Nkrumah, the man who would lead Ghana to become the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence in 1957. He openly cited Gandhi's nonviolent philosophy as a guide for his positive action campaign. Strikes, boycotts, and mass mobilizations straight out of India's toolkit. Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, known as Mwalimu or the teacher, also embraced Gandhi's principles. He believed that liberation was not just about ejecting colonizers but about building an ethical, self-reliant society. And then there was Nelson Mandela. While imprisoned on Robben Island, he studied Indian independence movements closely. Mandela later admitted that Gandhi's example gave him both courage and strategy in the darkest days of apartheid. But India's influence wasn't just philosophical. It was also deeply political, played out on the world stage. After independence, India became a loudspeaker for anti-colonial struggles worldwide. At the United Nations, Indian diplomats consistently pushed for decolonization resolutions. They defended the rights of Algeria, Kenya, and South Africa at a time when Western powers still clung to empire. India also offered scholarships to African students, hosted liberation leaders, and provided training in diplomacy and law. For young African activists, traveling to Delhi wasn't just about education, it was about absorbing the atmosphere of a free country that had defied the odds. This cross-continental solidarity gave African independence movements international legitimacy. But on the ground in Africa, the fight wasn't just political, it was emotional. The British Empire had used similar strategies in both India and Africa: divide and rule, economic exploitation, and harsh crackdowns on protests. Africans looked at India's story and saw their own lives reflected. When Nkrumah declared Ghana independent in 1957, crowds celebrated not only for Ghana but for the entire continent. Newspapers across Africa called it the India of West Africa. Within a decade, dozens of African countries followed. The domino effect was unstoppable. India's independence had planted the seed, and Africa's soil was ready. When India tore down the Union Jack in 1947, it didn't just change Asia. It rewrote the script of the 20th century. Across Africa, leaders found in India's victory both a model and a morale boost. Gandhi's philosophy, Nehru's diplomacy, and the symbolism of India's freedom together gave Africa the courage to rise. By the 1970s, nearly the entire continent had broken free from colonial rule. And behind that wave of liberation was the echo of India's struggle, proving that when one nation wins freedom, it can light the path for many others.